are going in a bit more fun direction. Certainly, like Toxic Avenger is a blast because watching movies like that or like Jimmy and Stiggs with an audience is really the only way to watch it. Because if you see it with a theater, the person next to you might be having a totally different experience, and you really just feed off of that energy.
You're getting people back in the movies. They're looking for escapism, general catharsis with the anxiety and the stress of everything. I think you're getting movies that are fun, tongue-in-cheek, a bit more bombastic, get people to have a good time.
Well, people crave that theatrical experience. That is the magic of what we do. I mean, TVs are much more personal, but theatrically released movies are at their very best a communal experience. And it's so cool to be in an audience when that kind of alchemy is happening.
Curious about creating high-quality YouTube videos? Enroll in video editing and production classes at Manhattan Edit Workshop to sharpen your skills and turn a hobby into a career. Start your journey to becoming a pro today.
Hello, and welcome to another installment of Sight, Sound, and Story, where we have the unique pleasure of talking to the artists and creators behind film editing, sound, and cinematography. My name is Chad Anderson, and in honor of the fall season, I am delighted to be joined by the editors behind modern horror movies and TV shows, and this is going to be a bit of a crazy one. I'd first like to introduce Josh Ethier, editor of Companion, as well as the Eli Roth co-signed Jimmy and Stiggs. Also, I'd like to introduce Geofrey Hildrew, editor of Carnival Row, Once Upon a Time, and in this case, The Bondsman, which we'll be talking about. And of course, I'm excited to introduce both Brett Bachman and James Thomas, who have edited the remake of the trauma classic, The Toxic Avenger. Welcome to the show, guys. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk to us on this afternoon, morning.
Lovely to be here.
Delighted
to be here.
I'd like to ask each of you, in terms of horror movies, I go to the movies a lot, and nowadays it seems like horror movie is just huge. Do you guys think you have a reason for this in terms of, like, every trailer I watch is another horror movie, another horror movie, another horror movie? Is there something about horror movies that are just on the rise again in our culture that have become this kind of ubiquitous thing?
I think coming out of the pandemic, people just wanted to be back into the movie theaters. And I think that horror is such a great reason to go to a movie theater. It's such a communal experience. You know, like a couple weeks ago, seeing Weapons in a theater and listening to an audience respond to that, and like discovering those twists and turns together, and having that level of surprise and feeling the anticipation and dread in the audience. It's really something that can't really be matched. It's even why, even when we were all stuck at home, we were still getting together like small groups of people inside of a bubble and watching horror films. So I think that's just something that's going to continue to be strong for people.
I also think people are starved for original stories right now too. And historically, horror has been a lower budget sort of medium, and I think it's a genre that affords opportunities to take chances and try bold, different things. And I think at this time where there have been so many different things in the theaters that feel alike, it's audiences are feeling like a refreshing, like, oh, there's something new to go see. Let's go check this out.
I think that also brings up the idea that for a lot of directors, their first film is a horror movie. I was looking through a list of like directors, and you go from, James Gunn, and you go from, even Spielberg. It's all, the introduction into movie making is horror. And I think there's kind of that, like, that's where your big break comes into there. And for, some of the directors here, starts with, and as editors start with horror, I think becomes a thing.
I think it's a wonderful sandbox for directors and production teams to work in. I mean, you can do some amazing things with a limited scope, limited budget. You have a full kind of palette of creativity, and you have the added constraint of working within a genre for some kind of objective. People show up to horror. People show up. They traditionally do. You can, like I said, make one for not a whole lot of money, and they can strike lightning.
I think it's a gateway to. By the way, I have to say, I feel like a bit of an interloper here because I'm not traditionally a horror guy, but I got the opportunity to dabble with Toxic Avenger, which was an incredible experience. But so I'm really here to listen to you guys and to learn something. But what I would say, my limited experience has been that it does seem like a gateway in terms of what Brett was saying, in terms of budget, people get their opportunities to kind of experiment. And comedy's the same. You know, you get these low budget comedies that directors get given, and they are able to shine, and that then becomes their stepping stone onto other things.
And vice versa, you could find directors that I think are very at home in the horror genre. I mean, I could see you look at people like John Carpenter and Sam Raimi. I mean, they live and breathe. This is where they're most comfortable. People like Joe Dante. I mean, it's for a lot of directors, yeah, it can be a gateway, certainly. But I think you talk to a lot of folks and they feel just at home, you know, spending decades making creepy stuff.
I think one of the interesting things for this series, because we've done a previous series on horror movies and horror and fantasy, this is really fun. You know, I've watched a lot of horror movies in theaters that have scared the life out of me. This is just a good time. And I think to what you were saying about after the pandemic, Josh, I went to go see Five Nights at Freddy's, which I'm not a huge Five Nights at Freddy video game. It was never my thing. It's my kids' thing, and so I went with them. But seeing that in a full audience with, you know, 400 people losing their minds, there was no place I wanted to watch that other than there. Like, I couldn't sit on my couch and watch that at home. It had to be this, you know, event, goofy, overwhelming experience. Do you think there's something about making horror movies or, you know, potentially scary movies fun again?
I think that's definitely a trend, that things are going in a bit more fun direction, you know. Certainly, like, Toxic Avenger is a blast. I mean, I remember seeing that years ago when they were just finishing it up, and thankfully it's now coming out in theaters where it belongs to be. Because watching movies like that, or like Jimmy and Stiggs with an audience, is really the only way to watch it. Because if you're watching it at home, it's not as much of a, you know, you feel like, oh, okay, this is what's happening next. This is what's happening next. But if you see it with a theater, the person next to you, the person in front of you, the person behind you might be having a totally different experience, and you really just feed off of that energy. And I think that for a long time we've had this, and Brett and I recently did a Fangoria interview where we were talking about this, where, like, you know, trauma is the monster. It's been a lot of that for years, where, like, people are working through a lot of, like, very deep things, and they're putting it into horror films, and that stuff has also been great. I'm not knocking that at all. But it does seem like in the last probably like year or so, the things that have been more successful are the things that are driving people to have a good time in theaters. And it's great to be a part of that as well, as much as Brett and I, because we've been doing this for such a long time, have been a part of the Trauma is a Monster series that was running for a really long time.
I think it's a bit of a reaction to what's been in the pop culture zeitgeist the last few years, and particularly in the horror genre, such a richness of these deeply symbolic stories where you have grief as a metaphor, and then you have, I think, kind of a flip side, and this is kind of a little bit of a reaction to what's been a predominating trend since like 2014. And you get, like, to Josh's point, you're getting people back in the movies. They're looking for escapism. They're looking for general catharsis with the anxiety and the stress of everything in modern day politics and just the world as it is right now. And I think you're getting movies that are fun, movies that are a little tongue in cheek, movies that are a bit more bombastic, to get people to have a good time. Just like
that's what people crave. I think they crave that interaction, that theatrical experience, right? Because that is the magic of what we do. I mean, TV is a much more personal kind of the way you consume TV, but theatrically released movies are at their very best a communal experience, and it's so cool to be in an audience when that kind of alchemy is happening. It's really, really fun. So I think people want that. They're craving to get back into theaters, and long may it last. It's been a pretty good summer.
Seriously.
Yeah, or even like last year, you know, The Substance, I thought was so much fun and so creative, and look at the awards wave that movie ran. You know, people really responded to that in a fresh way. I thought was really terrific for the genre.
I remember seeing that in a theater opening weekend, which is the other point too, is like, if you're going to be a person who's actively going to horror films, we all just sort of gravitate to those Friday, Saturday night screenings when the movie's open. But like seeing The Substance, for instance, in a theater next to a couple of guys who had no idea what they were about to watch. And, you know, me being a horror fan for, you know, 30 plus years, I'm like, oh, cool. It's like leaning into all this stuff that I've seen before, but they didn't have that sort of background. So hearing them respond to what they were seeing on screen was honestly like one of the core memories of seeing that movie, was just, you know, hearing these other 2 or 3 guys be like, what? And that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people are going for these days, is that sort of like surprising turns in a theater, you know, like Weapons, for instance, how like you're watching it and people were just so confused by everything that's happening, and every new surprising turn was like so interesting, and you hear people like visibly or physically responding to what they're seeing on screen. It's incredible, and I think that's why that's so big right now.
I want to ask you guys about I like the interesting relationship between a director and an editor. There's some directors who are very, you know, I guess supervisory in a way that they want their vision and only their vision. And then there's directors who are more collaborative and say, hey, you know, there is some freedom to change this if it's not working, and I'm going to sit back and trust my director, or trust my editor to cut this. Were there a lot of freedoms that you were given to kind of adapt the story, both the series in the Bondsman and in these films, Toxic Avenger and Jimmy and Stiggs, to say, hey, this needs to work better this way? Or was there a clear-cut vision from them that they wanted it their way?
So Bondsman was an interesting situation because the 2 directors I worked with, one of the directors I had worked with before, so I sort of knew what his style, Tor Fordendahl, I sort of knew what his style was going to be and how he was going to approach the material. And he's a giant Steven Spielberg fan, so he has very specific shot designs and approach to how he constructs scenes. The other director that I worked with, Lauren Wolkstein, I had never worked with before, and she cut the episode that I presented the clip from for today, and she did a terrific job. I really enjoyed working with her. When I came onto this project, I was very excited about it for a number of different reasons, because it's sort of a mashup, you know, horror with comedic elements in it. But most importantly, it was an opportunity to work with Kevin Bacon, who's such a giant horror icon. I mean, all the way back to Friday the 13th, and one of my favorite kind of, also sort of in this horror comedy kind of genre movies, you know, from my teenage years was Tremors. And that was directed by Ron Underwood, who I was fortunate enough to get to know really well and become friends with when I worked on Once Upon a Time. So over the years, I've had many conversations with Ron about how, you know, not just the difficulties of cutting horror, but blending those 2 genres together of horror and comedy, because it's a very tricky space to do, and it's not always done so well. So I felt like I came kind of into this project sort of armed with years of conversations and experiences talking to Ron, and an opportunity to work with Kevin. And then in this episode particularly, you know, this was the 6th episode in the series. So kind of cutting through the first 5 episodes of the series, we sort of had an opportunity to sort of explore and experiment tonally. So by the time we got here, you know, we sort of knew some of the chances that we could take on the opportunities and the genre mashing and using music and needle drops and things like that to just kind of enhance the storytelling experience. I think, you know, cutting comedy and horror, I think, are probably more alike than disalike, because, you know, a lot of it is set up and tension and timing and reaction. And I think as different as those 2 genres seem, they're very similar, actually, if you think about it from an editing perspective.
So we had Macon Blair as our writer-director. Macon is the ideal collaborator, I think. He talked to most editors. I think they'd like a director that has a North Star, that has a vision. But he welcomes you into the collaborative process. A lot of directors will kind of lay out exactly what they're looking for, and they don't want to kind of deviate from that. Macon is the type of individual where he communicates very well using tonal comps, using references, using drawings, art, music, of kind of where the inspiration is driving towards. And of course, Toxic Avenger being a remake of a very famous cult movie, you have the original to go back to, in the sense of this is the overall tonal component that we're looking for. Working with Macon, he's very open to receiving alternative ideas, new material, but typically, I would present things as scripted, have conversations with him about the original intent, and then if I wanted to pitch something else, you have that alternate version you can show him pretty readily. And being that we are a comedy as well as a genre film, we are constantly revising changes, putting it in front of audiences. And so we're, pivoting, testing, revising, through months of this process. And so it's really great having a director like Macon that is open to revisions, open to changes, and yet at the end, he still is very aware of, conscious of that North Star of like what this vision is supposed to be, and never to deviate too far from what makes this film special, what makes the character special, and what will drive audiences to see this movie in the first place.
I probably had it so different than everyone else on this panel, because also our movie was so low budget. Basically, it started as an art project between friends. So I live about a quarter of a mile down the road from Joe, and I live about a mile down the road from the other actor, another friend of mine, Matt Mercer. So that was a very like playful experience where Joe would have a script and he would have they would learn the lines, but then he would just throw them away and be like, let's just figure it out. These are the 3 beats we need to hit, and we can do it in any order, and we can play around. And they would improvise. They would do each take differently. And usually I was on set to be like, I don't think that's going to cut as well. You might want to make sure you hit that before you hit that, or, make sure you get that line out before you walk into the kitchen, different things like that. And then also I had the incredible experience of being able to, we shot on super 16 millimeter film. So we would send the footage off to Kodak. I'd get it back, I'd process it, I'd, sync it all up. We would cut it together. And I would say to Joe, like, ooh, I think I need like one more shot. Or like, oh, I think this camera move could have been like a little bit better, or or he would see it and think like, oh, I really have this crazy idea for a tracking shot I want to do instead. So it was weird because you're shooting on film, and so often when you're in editorial, it's like, well, this is what we have, and we're changing our decisions based on what we have. But this was a situation where it was like, well, we shot the whole thing in Joe's apartment. It stars Joe. It's cameras that are owned by Joe. And I own all the editorial equipment and everything that's processing everything. So we could just go shoot something new, which is sort of a double-edged sword, and why we shot the movie for about 4.5 years, was that we kept going back and saying like, this could be better, that could be better. We can try something a little bit bigger here. But I also had complete freedom. Joe always sits in with me for assembly. I don't do any sort of like editor's assembly without him, because usually I'm on set with him. Which is uncommon. Most of the other films, I'm working on one right now where I was editing during shooting, obviously keeping an assembly going. But the situations with Joe are so different. So he just sits behind me right there on that couch, and he just hangs out. I put things together. Usually he doesn't say much because I'm trying to like just figure things out or work through things myself. And then we'll talk about it after I have an idea of the footage and I have an idea of everything that we've put together. So it's remarkably collaborative. I have a ton of freedom when I'm working with Joe, but sometimes I have to change that up. Like Brett was saying, it's great to have a director who has a vision, who knows sort of exactly what's driving them, and you gotta, especially as an editor, you have to be able to work in all those different environments. You can work with someone who's like Kubrick, where it's like they know exactly what it is. Sure. And you're just sort of like supplying a little bit here and there, or you can work with somebody like Joe, for instance, who's just like, this is what I shot. What do you think? Maybe we can get more. It was a very different experience, and I'm very grateful to have at least had that once. Like, a 4-year living timeline. I think I was on like 17 different versions of Avid throughout this film.
Oh, wow. Yeah, fair enough. James, Brett commented a little bit about Toxic Avenger and the director, Macon Blair, giving some freedom and some collaboration. Did you have any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I think listening to you guys and talking about comedy and horror being these sort of, I don't think they're new bedfellows, but I think they offer this incredible opportunity to, it's kind of like a bait and switch, right? It's like that you have the horror psychological element, and then you have the release of comedy, which I think is just this extraordinary kind of combination. But in terms of working with a director like Macon, I mean, honestly, it's just a gift. I mean, to work with a creative kind of force like him. He had such a clear vision for the movie, and he understood the exactly what he was inheriting, the original, the campness, and then he updated it in this just glorious way. I think. I mean, the movie is so much fun, and it's taken such a long time to get into theaters for reasons that everyone's going to see. It's definitely close to the bone, and thank goodness for a company like Cineverse having the courage to step up and release the movie. But working with Macon, I just did a movie with Jared Hess. It's like that collaboration at its best is a trust, right? It's an ebb and flow of here's an idea, maybe this isn't working the best it can, but here's a suggestion. And as editors, I think the best we can hope for is to have a receptive, open director who is willing to have that dialogue, willing to have that exchange. And then ultimately the audience decides for us, right? We have our screenings and they'll let us know if something's fun. Comedy and horror are quite similar. It involves just an expulsion of emotion, right? A joke will get your diaphragm going. Comedy, horror will get you releasing in a way as well. So that combination of those two things, I think done right, as Josh was just saying when I came back on, it's pretty tricky. And I think you were saying oftentimes it's not done very well, but when it is done right, it's kind of magic.
I want to take a look at this clip from Jimmy and Stiggs. This is kind of the setup introductory clip from Jimmy and Stiggs. And I want to talk about how overwhelmed I was in the theater watching this in a minute. So let's take a look at this clip and then we'll talk about it for a sec. To see this in the theater, I watched the trailer beforehand. And the trailer beforehand, there's these kind of bombastic, quotes from critics of, cocaine filled, blah, blah, whatever. I've never done drugs. I'm not a drug guy. The pace of this is what I imagine going on a bender is like. It captured, I don't know, but I just imagine from just watching the onslaught of scene after scene after scene and the amount of drugs that, Joe is doing in this movie is it's nonstop. What is it like to edit that level of speed, Josh?
I think I think it's really fun. Obviously, the movie is remarkably over the top, and that's kind of the whole point of it.
Yeah.
I know lots of drug people; they're all wonderful folks, and none of them have problems with alien abductions. But I think that was something that Joe wanted to do for the character, was like, you should believe at any moment that he's either having a psychotic break, he's hallucinating, or this is actually happening. And those were, and either of those could be equally true. And, we weren't going to define which one of them was going on. It's funny watching that scene because that scene, I think, encapsulates probably the longest amount of footage. There's probably like a 4-year span of Joe in that footage. I pop up, a bunch of our friends pop up, other filmmakers pop up. It was really like an all hands on deck experience. And that was very much born from, we had a first act that was like very long and had a lot of explanation. There was a lot of dialogue. There was all this stuff. And as we were putting the movie together, we were like, it's not really that kind of movie. Like, I think people just want to be chucked in, like they just want to get chucked in as fast as they possibly can. So Joe was like, I think we should figure out how to do a montage. And then he started shooting more footage to support that montage, be it on like the interviews with our friends were shot on like mini DV camera. And then we would shoot like 8mm inserts of Joe around his apartment, either doing drugs or the stuff with the aliens, like the alien autopsy-esque footage. Yeah. So there's like a mix of all these different formats in it, which is something that Joe loves. He's a big Oliver Stone fan, big JFK fan, but who isn't? And it was all about like sort of maximalizing and putting everything that we could in there. And then I was like, we should definitely make it feel like the sun is up, the sun is going down. So you feel like over the course of this 3 minutes, like it's getting darker, the LA sun is dropping. By the end of it, he's in like a dark apartment. We've established the lighting that we're going to sort of live in for the rest of the movie, until things go further off the rails. It was like just a huge sequence that could set up so many different things at once. And it was in some form or another for probably 2 years or so. And then it was about, once we finally had it sort of set, we were like, we love this. This is great. I think I was using originally like a 9 Inch Nails track over the top of it. We gave it to our composer, Steve Moore, who I think did a great job of just like amping up and adding like a new instrument here, like a new piece of instrumentation here, like, oh, there's a new melody all of a sudden, or we're dropping out here to leave room for the dialogue. And it sort of gives it a nice ebb and flow, like organically, at least as on this movie's heartbeat, which again is not typical of any other film I've worked on, except for maybe a couple with Joe. That's his whole thing, is maximalization. But yeah, no, and I love how much it covers. I love how many of my friends pop up in it. That's sort of like the mantra of the whole film, was just like a bunch of people getting together for several years and having like an art project that never ended, and now it's finally out and like playing in 35 millimeter over at Quentin Tarantino's theater in the East Side. Like, it's incredible.
I imagine, for me, I watching the hour and a half, that it was like I was gonna go and take someone else to see it the next night, and I was like, I don't know if I can. Like, but as an editor, to edit it, to watch the pace and it's like you had to watch it several times, I imagine.
Several thousand,
several thousand times in pieces, and then watch the whole thing straight through several times. It's like it'll mess with your brain chemistry a little bit. It is very, it is chaotic.
Yeah. Also, strangely, I used to live in that apartment with Joe, so that's like an added layer of like, every time it turns a corner or something, I just like, a certain flash in my brain comes up. But yeah, no, it's as designed to be absolutely ridiculous. It's Joe working through a lot of things personally, and the way that he chose to do it was to film a bender mixed with an alien abduction, all in his apartment. I'm sure he's glad to have his apartment back now. Well, actually, no. The Mystic Museum in Burbank has an art installation right now where Joe rebuilt his apartment, and they actually like came over with a truck and picked up all of his furniture. So he doesn't quite have his apartment back yet, but very soon he'll have his apartment back to normal. And I wonder what that will be like for him.
I remember about 2.5 years ago, I came over to a test screening at this apartment for another Joe Josh movie. And you had alien blood on the carpet. You had orange things on the walls everywhere.
Yeah,
and continue the description of like, oh, it's a work in progress. You'll see. Wait for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about that later, but about how much blood there was involved, alien blood there is. Jeff, I want to turn my attention to you for a second and ask about the idea. I think it's interesting because in a lot of modern series, there is the episodic, narrative arc, and then there's the kind of seasonal narrative arc of like transitioning across the season. And I always wonder about the editor who has to know 3, 4, 11, 20 episodes ahead of what's happening to maintain the individual episode as well as the ongoing story in terms of that. So you worked on 4 or 5 of the episodes of the 8-episode season, but there was some you skipped. Is it a challenge to maintain that relationship of like what the other editor might do that throws off the narrative structure in terms of the seasonal story?
Yeah, well, I think it's changing a lot because, nowadays more so you tend to have the season scripted out before you start a project, or at least drafts of all of the episodes. Whereas, years ago, like on a show like Once Upon a Time, where you're doing 23 episode season, you're getting the scripts week by week. So you're really almost in the audience's shoes, like as an editor, like, I don't know what's coming next, so I'm going to make this episode as good as I can. And then, later down the line, you're making adjustments and changes to sort of get where, the showrunners will start guiding you towards things that they need to get to or making changes as they're responding to story elements that are or aren't working. So yeah, in a situation like this, we had all the scripts, so knew what the arc for the season was, knew what the emotional journey for the character was. I think the biggest challenge, and I maybe touched upon this a little earlier, was just getting the tone of this right, because it's such a, in the best way possible, such a wacky series in that it's a horror, it's a comedy, there's musical elements and involved in it, and just kind of trying to find the right balance of when we could, when we needed to keep things grounded and emotional and keep the arc of the characters grounded, and when we could kind of go off the rails a little bit more and let the audience kind of embrace the fun of what we were trying to do. And because of the way that we were sort of scheduled with the way that we were sort of arranged as the Sun editors, there were myself and two other editors. Um, as we were getting into later episodes, we were starting to get some feedback on earlier episodes and figure out what was working. And we could look at each other's work and kind of cherry pick, oh, well, that idea is, people are responding well to that kind of vibe. Let's start experiment. So tonally, we were kind of shifting all 8 episodes sort of simultaneously as we were responding in sort of real time to what was working and not working as well.
James and Brett, I want to ask you about Toxic Avenger in terms of specifically, you are remaking this classic trauma film, and the trauma film is, you know, the height of, you know, Trauma's enterprise, but also the height of, you know, ridiculously camp, you know, or it's following the footsteps of, you know, Roger Corman or whatever it may be in terms of just B-movie camp. But now you're doing it with, you know, Kevin Bacon and Peter Dinklage and serious actors and you know, a somewhat of a better budget, I assume, than the 1984 film. Is there an inclination to make it as campy as the original film, or is it the revamped version? Was there a motivation to revamp it in terms of quality? You know, because you have these accomplished actors who are doing, you know, actual, you know, emotional performances, while still maintaining a film about a radioactive guy who kills people.
Look, I think the line that these guys trod with it. So I came in kind of halfway through the process here. So Brett and Macon had set this incredible template for the movie. And the line that they were able to tread in terms of a remake, right? People have so much expectation around a remake, especially something, a trauma movie, as you say, Chad, really camp, kind of plays into those kind of B-movie tropes. But what I think happened here that was kind of took it to the next level was you've got all of that stuff going on. You've got all of that gore. You've got everything you expect. But also there's this real heart to the movie. So there's a relationship between Peter Dinklage's character, Toxie, and his son, Wade, that it just has so much heart to it that I think is, that's the USP of this movie. That's the kind of gut punch. Mm-hmm. Like all the action sequences are, I mean, they're just ridiculous. They're so over the top. They're so camp. But then you have this mixed with this real genuine connection between these two fantastic actors. And that gives the movie this different layer of connection, I think, to audiences. And that's been the feedback, Brett, right? I think that we've got a lot from people is go ahead.
I was going to say, when we started, Macon had a mantra: weird, sweet, gross. The North Star of the film was to recapture the tone of the Toxic Avenger series as fans knew and love. It was always high camp. It's always bombastic. It's big. And what James articulated, there is a strong sincerity. There's a beating emotional core at the center of this that we try to treat sincerely, and we go at earnestly. I mean, that being said, in the test screening process, we were really surprised to learn that audiences craved more, that they wanted as big as we could go. I mean, can you milk more frames of viscera out? Can you get more, can you make the entire scope of this thing larger and even more crazy? And I think a lot of our efforts toward the middle to end of the process was to how can we introduce even more shocking components into the film, and yet still kind of thread that balance of this is still a stepfather stepson story at its core, but it's surrounded by these spears and these layers of this absurdity, which was really challenging, but also quite fun to work on.
Yeah,
and we did a bit of that, right, Brett? With particularly with Miss Meat, you know, that was a scene when everyone sees the movie that it's kind of the pinnacle of whatever you want to call it, bad taste, whatever it is. But there were elements that we added to that we picked up that people wanted, as Brett's saying, more of that stuff, which was, you know, I guess that's the expectation coming to a movie like this is like, okay, what are going to be the kind of gasp out loud moments? And you know, Macon was very, very good at identifying those and then very specifically targeting, you know, someone getting run over, their head getting run over, someone's guts being introduced into a scene in a way that you might not expect. You know, it's it was a fun trip, definitely, in that regard.
Well, to that end, I do want to show the Miss Meat clip, because that was for me the classic of what a trauma film should be. So we have that clip. If we can load that up and take a look at that, I would love to talk about this.
My son's in there! Somebody do something!
Grievance 1, progressive fascism. Grievance 2, anti-Anglo media tyranny. 3, the global emasculatory agenda. 4, groupthink privacy. 5, Western alpha scapegoating. 6, science. 7.
Are you triggered?
I can't see what you're doing.
Are you triggered?
Shitheads, I'm blind.
Shitheads?
What's happening? Talk to me, what's happening?
Shitheads? Maybe I'll just show you who's a shitheads. What do you think, boys? I never cornholed me.
Recognize him?
You fucked up this time! Who the fuck are you?
Nobody special. Just some dude with a Come here, you! Stupid fucking antler! Oh, you too, dummy! Give me your lunch!
Is that man dead?
Yeah, that's his hand.
Oh, God!
What happened to that guy? He looks like a fucked up hot dog. I got it. He's putting it back in. Oh, fuck, he's putting it in.
No, stand by. Okay. We're seeing movement here. People are coming outside. It's not clear what's happening just yet.
Hey, get over there and give him a hand. Officer, get over there and help these people.
What the hell is that?
No! This little dude saved us. He's a hero.
I think this will transition into my I think one of the substantial questions for this is all of this, the Bondsman, the Toxic Avenger and Jimmy and Stiggs take some liberties with some obviously a lot of practical effects, some post visual effects for say the Bondsman. What is there a preference in terms of working with the practical effects or working with the VFX team to do digital effects, or is there a different mindset in terms of what you're doing, or is there a different reason for it? Jeff, so the Bondsman works with both. There are some practical things. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of things, but there's definitely some kind of digital VFX work in there. What's it like working with both and making decisions on when to use which?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost in Bondsman, we were always trying to lean into the practical effects where possible. So our on-set effects team did a really fabulous job of, building out all the practical, demon heads and bodies and parts and things like that would pop up in the episode. But there also is kind of a supernatural element to it as well with the demons. So a lot of that stuff was always planned to be VFX. So it was sort of just finding that right balance of do as much as we can with the practical effects before we need to let the VFX kind of take over. And my personal taste in horror, I mean, I grew up in the 80s watching lots of bad B horror movies on VHS because that's what I had access to sort of in rural Pennsylvania. So I always have a soft spot for the practical effects. And I think, I always enjoy those movies the most because, as a kid watching them, it was always like trying to figure out how did they pull this off and how did they do that? And I always, to this day, I sort of have an appreciation more for horror when you see less of the monster than too much of the monster or the gore.
Sure.
Because I think it's that fear of the unknown, or you don't know what's lurking around the corner, that sort of makes horror more scary for me. So yeah, so I think first and foremost it was lean into practical effects where possible. Then it was VFX cleanups for things like wire removals and rigs and that sort of gobbledygook, and then in other moments just enhance where we could with the VFX for things like the fire effects or things like the actual demon effects or things that the transition or change actually on camera.
James and Brett, in terms of this clip that we just watched, I mean, it's a lot of practical, the guts coming out of the butthole and craziness. But
you said it. You went there. I love it.
I went there. Sorry, but then also, the glowing mop of toxic, there. A little bit of that's digital, I assume. Yes. I trust. So what was it like working with both?
It has to be a marriage, at least for our film. Remaking, coming from genre film, being a fanatic of the original, of this type of pulpy cinema, I knew that the core audience is going to really demand practical effects. I think went into the movie in the filmmaking process of trying to do as much of this stuff practically with liquids, explosions, whatnot. But there are some effects that just can't realistically be done practically. The guy's job being ripped off and for the type of shot that Macon wanted. And so we went into editorial knowing that a few of these things will have to have visual effect augmentation down the line. And one of the interesting things that we found in the test screening process was that audiences were demanding even more viscera, even some of these set pieces to be even a bit more grand. And so we began to take some of these practical elements and began to augment, began to supplement and add a little bit more to get the right emotional, that big reaction, that emotional release that we've been building towards for a long time. Case in point, there's a scene that's about 40 minutes into the movie where one of our villains gets his arm ripped off very dramatically. Mm-hmm. And every single time we screened the movie for a test audience, it became the loudest point in the theater. And because we've been building for 40 minutes to this point. And in early versions of the movie, you know, we did it practically, and we had a geyser, we had fountains, and then our audiences kept on saying, we want more. We want more of a relief. And so more of a release, just to completely open that valve. And so it's a shot that we augmented a little bit. We added a little bit more of.
A little bit. We added tons to it.
We added tons.
We went nuts with it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, it's a bit of a marriage for our film. It's usually some kind of practical base and then visual effect augment to supplement or add more. And then some shots, just by their nature, had to be full CG.
Josh, with Jimmy and Stiggs, if there was post effects, if there was digital effects, I don't know. It seems like entirely practical.
Yeah, it is. It's fully practical. Yeah. Everything captured on celluloid. The only thing I think we did digitally was do some cleanup, some wires, some puppeteering, sort of like mechanics were removed. Which by the way, I'm totally not against visual effects. I love when they're done properly, and especially like in the Toxic clip. I think the best thing is also drawing back to what Jeff said, where it's like, when we were kids and we were watching these horror films, you were like, oh my God, how did they do that? That's awesome. Mm-hmm. And then with the digital tools that have become available in the last 20, 30 years, you have the ability to create something practically or composite it or track it onto something now digitally, which now creates, like, it opens up new shots that can be done, new things that can be accomplished, and new audiences that can go see something and say, oh my God, how did they do that? You know, I love seeing an effect in a movie and being bewildered as to how it's done, even though now I believe there's like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction where people just go, oh, it must be digital because I can't explain it. So I'm always happy to buy a disc and pop on the behind the scenes and be like, oh man, so they actually did that. That's incredible. And like, they did it this way. But Jimmy and Stiggs and Joe in particular, he is always practical. It's like, it's funny. It's so old school. Everything shot on film, everything practical. And he pushes himself to try to do as much as he can. The end of the movie is him wearing a POV rig as he saws off all of his own limbs on camera. And it's, you know, I mean, spoiler alert, but please, that's the reason to watch the movie, I think, is him trying to figure out how to do that stuff and like masking those cuts and, you know, using different atmospheric effects. Like I remember in all the POV stuff where we were trying to mask cuts, we would mount like a geyser, almost like, you know, the Nostromo ship, where like Ripley's running through and all of a sudden you get that big like a big steam effect. And we would use that to mask cuts around areas that we knew. So we would like puppeteer a giant swinging tentacle, and then Joe would run through a steam blast, and then on the other end would be like a different set, a different room, because we were always working in a smaller confined space. And we were just using techniques like that all the way through to try to extend everything as much as we could and make everything as big as we could and as brash as we could. But yeah, that's just how we've always done it. But I think the perfect idea is like what Brett was saying, where it's like when you have something that's been shot practically, you have all the reference there, you have all the lighting reference, you have all that stuff, and you either composite or track it in a way onto a live actor, or you embellish it with a little bit of digital gore, things like that. And as long as the audience responds well to it, that's always the intended effect.
Well, I think it's interesting with Jimmy and Stiggs because I almost think you talk about like stuff like wire removal. I almost feel like the bad like leaving the wires in almost makes it campier. You know, to it's kind of like showing the magic trick of like how this is how ridiculously insane the magic trick is, because like. No one's no one's believing that he's really wrestling with the alien on his back. He's literally holding it on his back while it gnaws into his neck or whatever. And that was more entertaining for me, personally, than to see it like you said, like the movie Aliens, where it's, believable. This is just insane ridiculousness there. And so part of that camp is kind of showing what's behind the curtain in kind of a certain way.
Yeah. If someone had told me at this point in my career that I would be working on a movie for years where my best friend was basically fighting a Muppet, I would have been like, no, I don't think that's how this is gonna play out. But there's also, it's funny, there's a famous quote about the Muppets where it's like, why is Michael Caine so good in a Muppet Christmas? It's like, oh, because he treats his Muppets as fellow actors. And they were like, well, what about Tim Curry? And it's like, well, he treats himself like a Muppet.
There you go.
And I think that's what Joe was doing when he was fighting these aliens. It's like, yes, on set we were all like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe we're all grown adults. And this is what we're doing on like, a Thursday evening after work. But to then see him throw himself at it so hard, and his whole thing was, I don't want to do it as a joke. I want everything to be deadly serious. So at the very least, we're in that level of camp. Like everyone there, the heart is there, and it's like we're all taking it very seriously, even if it's true, just literally a puppet on Joe's back as he throws himself around his office.
But I want to ask about the idea that you shot this over 4 years, or that Joe shot this over 4 years. When I watched this, I went, there's no way they didn't do this in one night. With the amount of, and not because, it's badly made, but because the amount of carnage that happens in this one apartment. Do you just leave it there? Do you just like
yeah, Joe lived with it for years.
I was like, well, they can't clean this up every, what do we want to have friends over? Like, no, it's just
no. We had friends over. That's like Brett was saying. We would throw house parties at the house and like have people over, and it was like, yep, it's just a living set. Just take some pictures with the aliens. Don't break them. And it was like that for 4 years. I mean, thankfully, I think it's like every year in California, you're supposed to get like 20% more of your security deposit back. Joe's lived there for like a decade. I'm sure he's fine. But yeah, even the owner and all the neighbors, we never once had a complaint from neighbors. They were all really cool. I think because they were used to Joe watching a lot of loud horror movies, they just assumed that he was having a party. So we'd go downstairs and like be throwing things into the dumpster, and like a neighbor would come by and go, oh man, that was hell of a party last night. We're just like, yep. Yeah, it's Joe with a chainsaw running up and down the hallway.
Yeah. How many doors did you go through?
I mean, I think I went to Lowe's and bought 3 or 4. We also, there's a couple that didn't end up on screen because we also had to score them ourselves, which as an editor, I don't know why I'm scoring doors, but yeah, we went through so much stuff. I can't believe that he didn't get kicked out of there.
Jeff, you brought this clip with us. This is from episode 6, and I want to ask you a specific question, but I want to watch this clip from the Bondsman, because there's a moment in there that I'm really curious about. This is when the monsters, demons come to Hub's home, place of business, and carnage ensues, preceded by a little bit of torture, which is the ongoing story. So let's take a look at this clip, and I want to talk to you about it.
Go ahead and kill me. You already did it once. Show Marianne and Cade what your love looks like. You're fucking crazy. Mama's back. If you so much as... I'm not the bad guy here. So don't make me be. Kay, is that you? Shop's closed, mister. Hey, we're closed. Come back tomorrow. What the hell are you doing? Jesus, Lord, please help me.
Jeff, the question I want to ask is, I saw this episode and I immediately made a note because I was going to do this interview. Kevin Bacon slipping on blood. Scripted, just Kevin Bacon's brilliance, or a lovely accident that just happened to work out?
I don't know. It was not scripted. I suspect that it was a lovely accident or Kevin's brilliance as an actor, but I remember seeing that in dailies for the first time and just laughing out loud and saying that I don't care what I have to do. That's making it to, that's going to be the punctuation on this sequence because it was just so funny.
Yeah, just because I mean, it's just like if it's brilliant acting, that's amazing. But like I would see that, you know, if there was 6 versions of that, and in one of them he slips on the blood after he's just cut this guy's face off. I like. It's
Yeah,
just
I
perfect.
agree.
It just you know, and it adds that little bit of humor to the whole circumstance of that. There's just blood everywhere, and it adds that little bit. It's. I'm just like, that's just really well done. That's really good.
Yeah, I think this was a whole sequence that was kind of catered towards the genre fans because, you know, we're starting out with Kevin in a situation where, you know, it's the worst case scenario for his character up to this moment. His family's in trouble. He's chained to a bench. His fingers are broken. And these demons show up at his, you know, in his place of business, in his home. And it's like, how is he going to get out of this? And I think, you know, smart audience members going to know, okay, there's 2 more episodes. Kevin's probably going to get out of this situation, but like, how is he going to do it? Yeah, it was a lot of fun working on this sequence just because of sort of like the genre wish fulfillment scenes. You know, it's like the Evil Dead vibes of the chainsaw and the one-handed shotgun. You know, it's very Ash, Bruce Campbell feeling. But as an editor, the challenge sort of was just the simultaneous action that's happening in the sequence. And you know, it's sort of a very linear sequence from beginning to end where both of these characters start the scene in one place and need to get to another place. But the trick was, you know, and I remember it reading very well on the page and the screen, the sequence was very well storyboarded out by our director, Lauren. But when I started piecing it together, it was like, whoa, okay, all of these beats have to happen, but there needs to also be urgency in both cases. So how am I going to tell both of these stories at the same time? So there was a bit of editorial trickery and rejiggering on my part just to kind of try and find what the right balance was to be able to unfold these both stories at the same time and keep it urgent and keep the stakes high, and allow the audience to sort of just embrace the fun of the whole thing. And I think at one point I had just kind of fitting in the theme of the series. I had tempted a Danzig song, like Long Road Out of Hell, or something like that, and made this big long rock and roll sequence, which was totally fun, and everybody loved it the first time they saw it. But somehow the needle drop ended up working against the pacing of the sequence. So we worked to, we ended up, our brilliant composers on this. We had Tyler Bates, who's a rock star sort of in his own right, and composer as well. And Kevin Bacon's son, Travis, was a co-composer on the show. So they kind of, found this sweet spot of rock and roll and score to sort of bring us home.
I think the Bondsman mixes, and I want to ask for all of you guys, there is a moment where the Bondsman sort of, it's fantasy based on demonic characters, so it has that horror element to it. It's not overwhelmingly scary. And Jimmy and Stiggs, there was one point of it which gave me nightmares, but it did not give me nightmares. And Toxic Avenger is playfully cute and ridiculous. Was there any motivation for any of you to make this scary, to make what you were doing have a scary element to it? Was there any moment that you said, "Oh, we need to either creep people out or make them uncomfortable or give them a jump scare," or was it just like full throttle ridiculousness the entire time?
No, I think in our case, that moment came, the first time that moment really comes is at the end of the third episode. And at the end of our third episode, there's a flashback sequence where we start to see a little bit about the sin that got Kevin Bacon's character Hub sent to hell.
Yeah.
And the mandate was, we've got to make this feel as dark and scary as possible, and maybe make it feel like the audience has been rooting for someone who actually might be the villain of this series.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I'm a huge fan of a movie Brett cut called Mandy, and I see the poster behind him, and I use that score all the time when I'm cutting it. So I remember pulling score from Mandy to score that moment at the end of episode 3, and just we ended up kind of cutting it more stylistically and impressionistic and more like a trailer to kind of get the audience on their toes and kind of sort of start to subvert their expectations.
I think with Joe's filmmaking specifically, like, he's such like a James Cameron head that everything that he wants to do, even though he loves horror films and he loves, action and sci-fi, everything is sort of like this driving escalation, the way that, like, in Terminator, you'll have a scene where you have to like learn a bunch of backstory, but it's actually just Kyle Reese yelling at it. And like in like the middle of a car chase, that's how you get your backstory. So Joe takes from that a lot. So I don't know that he ever wanted to lean into being scary. I think he wanted to lean into it being surprising and it being like an escalation that keeps building and building and building. Although on other films I've worked on, there's certainly a penchant to try to make things scary, to make people jump, certainly to surprise audiences wherever possible. But I think in Jimmy and Stiggs' case, it was just like, can he possibly be doing more cocaine? Like that was the scary surprise that we were trying to lead into.
On Toxic, I don't necessarily think we ever had the mandate to make things scary. It's not a horror film in those veins. I mean, the cousin of that is that we are looking for ways to make things more tense. We're looking for ways to bring more make it seem more uncomfortable or push a scene a little bit darker. I remember there's a point around the end of the second act where Toxie is captured and then all these mad scientists begin to do mad experiments on him. And we had somewhat limited coverage to try and telegraph the severity of this abduction and these experiments. And we had this idea in editorial to reappropriate some of this footage to make it look like this had happened several times over the course of hours. And so we ended up making my assistants and I ended up making like this little micro montage of repurposing the footage from 2 different intercut scenes to make it look like They're extracting material, they're testing it, it's a fail. Extract more material, test it, it's another fail. Extract more material, and the third time, it's a success. And this is something that hadn't been scripted. This is something that we just kind of found through the process of testing the movie and showing it to our early audiences, that we need to feel a bit more depraved here. we want the film to get a little bit darker. So our main character has more of a phoenix moment, so to speak, to rise from the ashes and stand back up.
Yeah, I'd say Toxic inherently was never going to be a scary, dark horror movie. I think that the tone of it was pretty clear from the get-go. But so yeah, as Brett alluded to, it was really just trying to give the character more depth, and give him, a bit more credibility in terms of his relationship with his son, and then also, there's a scene where he's being chased down by an angry mob, that classic kind of B-movie trope, and that's a really fun scene. You hear dirt bikes in the background, and Macon had a very kind of specific way of how he wanted to design that scene. But yeah, it's so project led, right? It's like so dependent on what the actual source material is, and in this case, it was high camp.
There was one moment I want to touch on before we continue. That's very related to this. There was a sequence in the movie that we could never quite figure out what to do with, which was there's a music festival, and there's all this action sequence that occurs on this stage, and we had to kill off one of the characters. This guy dressed as the Zodiac Killer, and he's a breakdancing. He fights through breakdancing, and he's dressed like the Zodiac Killer. And there's a point where he's meant to fall off the stage and die, and we could never really figure out how to kill him. We had different ideas that were kind of shuffling around editorial. Like, does he fall into construction equipment? Does he fall into stage equipment and get electrocuted? And so there had been this ongoing debate of like, we need to make this surprising. We need to make it, what's the funniest way, the most outlandish way, dramatic way we can kill him. And I think eventually we set on, following the rules of our own movie, we determined that like just have him jump off the stage and explode into this giant black cloud of smoke and red viscera. And it got the immediate response out of the audience that we wanted.
Josh, I was going to say, seeing Jimmy and Stiggs in the theater, I clearly have a thing about things inside your body breaking through your skin. It messed me up in The Substance, and it messed me up in Jimmy and Stiggs. And that was the one nightmare that I had, was that I went home and then overnight I had, things bubbling up from my skin in my dreams. And I was like, damn you. That's the one that got me.
Yeah, and that's what's funny is like those are so fun to do practically. I was just watching like Altered States the other day, and it's literally the same exact technology where it's just like a bladder under the skin is like creating like a pulsing effect, and you're responding to it. And that's how Joe wanted to do it the same way. He was like, I don't want to do it digitally. I know that certainly we could, and it might even be a little bit easier, but we actually like rigged him up with a pump that ran through, and I think he was in the POV rig when it happened as well. So yeah, it was, and then we did that great gag at the end where it's in his brain, and because he's wearing the POV rig, you see it come down from the top of the frame like it is the top of his head. Yeah, we tried to push that as far as we could. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I do want to show this clip. We may have mentioned this before about the emotional state of Toxic Avenger, and I do want to show this Toxic Avenger clip, which is the kind of the heartwarming relationship between Wade and Toxie, and the moment of kind of confession in there. And Peter Dinklage delivers it very well. So let's take a look at this clip, and I'm going to ask you about it.
Wade!
Whoa.
What are you doing with her?
Never mind about her. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Does it hurt?
It's not bad. It's sort of like a sunburn.
I didn't ask for all the doctors and therapy and shit. I didn't ask for you to go out stealing to pay for it.
The money was for me. I'm sick. It's my head. There's medicine for it, and I was trying to pay for it, and then, man, well...
Are you gonna die? And you didn't tell me? Just like Mom. And I'm not gonna have anyone.
No, wait. I'm your dad.
No, you're not.
We need to get inside.
You never even got married.
I promise you, I am not going in.
So, yeah, again, we talked about this before, but we talked about this idea of there is a heartwarming aspect of this that I don't know that was in the original 1984 version to be taken seriously. There was some, there was kind of a semblance of a narrative in the 1984 version, but this is really trying to like, no, we have good actors, and we have Jacob Tremblay who can, seem like he cares. And you do thread that needle very close.
That's the key, I think, isn't it? I think it's as editors, we're so reliant on actors' performances, and I think Jacob is just an extraordinary talent. I mean, this was, correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but this was like 4 years ago it was shot. 3 years ago, probably.
2021, yeah.
Yeah, so it's for an actor that age to be giving a performance like that that's where that scene kind of lives and dies.
It has a unique that Toxic character has a unique component throughout the entire film, in which it is not Peter Dinklage under the suit. It's our stunt performer, Louisa. We engaged in the start of the movie with this very unique production process where Peter rehearsed the entire movie in character, and Macon filmed it. And so Peter would interact as Toxic for the later 2/3 of the movie after the transformation to really find the role, inhibit, make decisions. And like I said, Macon would film it. Then our actress, Louisa, would watch this footage, would study it, look at the mannerisms, look at the vocal inflections, and then it would be her that would be put in the suit. She'd be put in the prosthetics, be put in the makeup every single day. And then she would be playing, basically doing her best performance of Peter playing the Toxic Avenger. And so we would receive this material in, and when editorial was cutting this performance, we are cutting Louisa doing a Dinklage impression. And then subsequently, we are bringing Peter back into ADR, and we're redubbing over Louisa. And so it becomes this interesting mix of this dance between these two performers finding this one role. And the added complexity of this is that it forms the heart of the movie. This is your main character, and it's being reinterpreted and then reinterpreted by two different actors. I've never worked on anything quite like it before.
Yeah, I read that. That's such a weird process in terms of doing that. That you had, that it just adds an extra level of complexity that just seems overwhelming. But it worked out. And she's fantastic in her interpretation of doing her best Peter Dinklage impersonation.
She did do an extraordinary job under pretty taxing circumstances. I mean, that suit was not fun to wear.
I can't imagine,
And I think there's some preceding scenes with Peter actually earlier in the movie that kind of lay the groundwork, I think, for those subsequent scenes where like he's trying to make his son breakfast as a single dad and failing pretty miserably. And I can relate to that. I'm a single dad. So it's like again, it's just great writing to get us to that point where as Brett alluded to, it's such an intricate process to get that performance. And ADR, to pull off ADR at that level is really tricky. I mean, it's really tricky to get a credible performance from somebody who ultimately were not speaking the words. So that's a testament to that process and Louisa's performance. She was amazing, absolutely amazing.
I want to ask a more general editing question. In terms of your workflow, when you're working on a project, of the projects you've worked on, is there something that you rely on, like at your desk, that you need to help the magic happen? Do you need the script by your side? Do you need storyboards by your side? Do you need a director over your shoulder? Is there something, tactile or physical, or just in terms of, do you need Danzig playing in the background the entire time so that you can edit? Some people edit with music in the background. Some people edit with, they need, I need snacks when I edit. I need snacks on a constant basis. Is there something that you do, for either professionally or just, casually, that you decide that makes your edit process work better? Geoffrey?
Well, first and foremost, have a great assistant editor. I've been fortunate enough to be an assistant for quite a few projects now, and he's indispensable to me and makes my life easy because, we have a shorthand and he's able to anticipate my needs and have things prepped so that when I sit down at my desk, I'm ready to start working and be creative rather than think about all the nuts and bolts, and problems and minutia that I don't want to deal with. You did mention music. Yeah, like, as far as my process goes, it's something, usually when I read a script for the first time, I have, Spotify or my Apple Music account open next to me. And sometimes as I'm reading things, if an idea or a piece of music comes to mind, I'll just start creating a playlist or playing things that kind of put me in that emotional space and just start thinking of things. And then maybe I'll put that away and then come back, once I start getting dailies, maybe I'll go back to that playlist and be like, oh, well, when I read this the first time, I had this feeling, and for some reason this came to mind, and see if it works. And sometimes I'll just start playing music in the background and kind of get me in that space. And sometimes it's completely wrong and inappropriate, but it's something to start sort of responding to. And there've been situations where I cut a sequence together, and like the most inappropriate music piece that something that I thought would be perfect when I'm reading it is so inappropriate while I'm cutting, but then it sparks other ideas and sort of gets those creative juices sort of flowing.
Off the top of my head, the sound library is very important to carry around on whatever job I do. I am actively doing a lot of sound editing from the early assembly. They're typically pretty built out for me with ambiances, hard effects, a lot of dia work. But to echo Jeff, I mean, a great team is completely indispensable, and especially on a movie like the size of Toxic. I'd done a lot of films in the independent sector. Toxic was bigger at that point, bigger than my previous 5 movies combined in the sense of budget. And so I was stepping into kind of unfamiliar territory, being like an independent studio with Legendary. And I had a wonderful first in the form of Dylan Thomas. Had come from the Fast and Furious world, Pirates of the Caribbean, and just really was just such a crucial part of the editorial process for me. Someone to help lift me up, someone I could show cuts to. And then the rest of our team, our team in Austin with Adam, Lana, Latham, eventually Delaney with James. Like it's Derek, our core team members in editorial. We couldn't have done this movie without them.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely second both what Jeff and Brett have just said. That a good assistant team behind you is just, you cannot beat that. And I come from the comedy world and a lot of improv, and we use the scripting tool on Avid a lot. And we have a way of breaking down improv, and the assistants will not. It's very laborious work, but it's so useful. When a director comes in and goes, yeah, that line read isn't quite right. And you have like, hang on a second, click, 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 click. Here's the 4 reads of something. And you can really craft dialogue based on the work that your team has done. And, Delaney, who's my assistant, I hired her on a movie called Grimsby, on a Sacha Baron Cohen movie about 6 years ago. And she's had this meteoric rise from literally from a PA to she's now the movie that I'm working on. She will receive a co-editing credit. So she's had this incredible kind of accelerated journey, but purely based on her absolute ability. You know, no one's done her any favors. And so that is a really important part of it. Scripting, again, I think is something, and it's really interesting to hear other people's process, because I come from the music world. I started my career editing commercials and music videos in the 80s and 90s in London. And so I'm very musically driven, but I find sometimes with some music, temp music, you can get taken down a rabbit hole, and you can introduce a pace into a scene that doesn't really, it's not really helpful. And so I do tend to, if I want to get something together quick, I'll use a piece of music. If I'm really kind of have the time, then I'll sort of try and find the cadence of that scene just within the dialogue and the action, and then the icing on the cake becomes the music. So it's really interesting to hear how other people like Jeff talking about the Spotify idea, because I do think music is such an integral part of the final perception of a sequence, be it score, be it needle drop, whatever it is. But sometimes I find myself getting taken down a rhythmic rabbit hole by a piece of music, you know, that I don't necessarily want to.
About Script Sync, I just tested out Avid's new 2025 Script Sync AI. I'm a little intimidated by it. I almost want to go back to traditional, just throw the clips down and do it. I don't need you to go and
guess. I think sometimes it works. Sometimes we've been playing with it in our current cutting room, and it is, look, they'll get that stuff all dialed in, I'm sure, at some point, but there's nothing like the human interpretation of something.
I'm just going to put them down. I'm going to put the clips on there myself and do it myself. I'm not sure about it yet.
Well, now there's this scary new thing called vlubbing. Have you guys heard of this program called Flawless?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You can put ADR in characters' mouths and do lip manipulation.
Oh man.
I gotta tell you, just as someone who grew up watching like older films, I love when you like they find the cadence and they just like slip it perfectly in the mouth. And it's like really just like editors and sound folks, when we watch older films, we're like, oh yeah, that's definitely slipped in. But it doesn't bother me in the least. I love that stuff.
Josh, I'm going to ask you about the same question about things you need in your editing room or things you need in your editing workflow.
Well, I totally agree with what everyone said about having a wonderful team behind you, assistant editors and post PAs, post supervisors, working with folks like that to make it happen. Unfortunately, on Jimmy and Stiggs, I was all of those people, so it's hard to quite apply it for that. But definitely on most projects, that's 100% the case. And also, exactly like Brett said, like I keep a huge sound and music library, like a massive sound and music library, which actually, because Brett and I have worked together, I'm frequently updating him, like sending him a Dropbox with new scores and things like that, just to share and keep that growing and living. But also, I agree with James entirely. I think what you have to do first is cut a scene and then put music on it to support the idea and to support the pacing you've discovered, the sort of twists and turns that you've discovered through editorial. You don't want to start by putting a piece of music down and then cutting to that music. You definitely want to have a look at the scene first and interpret it first before you drop something on. But yeah, probably just that, my sound and music library. I mean, I crave a director. I love when a director wants to sit into a room and have a conversation, because you start by like talking about, oh, I had a cup of coffee and this is what I watched this weekend, and oh, I tried out this new restaurant, and you start to learn about each other and you start to have that interaction, and you feel more open sharing things, and it just grows from that. So I definitely prefer that to remote work. But the film I'm in now, I'm working remotely, and we're trying to recreate that across FaceTimes and Zooms and Pixel View and everything else. So it really changes every movie. I try to be as fluid as possible and not have any one thing where it's like I have to have that or else. I try to remain as open as possible so that I can be fluid and accept some new opportunities whenever they come.
Well, we are going to take a look at this last Jimmy and Stiggs clip. This is the big fight brawl between Jimmy and Stiggs, who I still wonder because of the amount of cocaine and other drugs and alcohol that were in all this fight, if Stiggs was even there. I still have this debate in my head of whether Stiggs actually existed or was he just losing his mind.
I don't want to settle that for you. So yeah.
Good. Leave it. It's going to be the mystery of cinema. Let's take a look at this clip.
Wow.
So I want to start by apologizing to everybody.
Wow.
You had to watch that.
That's awesome.
You know what? I was going to take my 12-year-old son is becoming a horror movie fan. He's become a horror movie fan, and like 9:30 at night, I was going to take him to see this, and he had stuff to do in the morning, and so he couldn't go, and I'm relieved, a little bit relieved that I didn't.
I think you made the right call.
Yeah. Good parenting.
As a father, I think you
Well
made
done.
I think you made the right call. What's ridiculous too is we shot that scene for, I think we shot it for like 4 months because Matt, the actor who plays Stiggs, he was working on a day job. He does like reality casting editing, so he would leave his day job around 7, have a bite to eat, go to Joe's around like 8 o'clock. We would shoot for 4 hours a night basically, and we would try to get like 2 or 3 shots, like just one little volley of violence, and then send him on his way. But the room stayed like that the entire time. It's probably still like that. And because we shot this movie with so little crew, there were whole stretches of days where we just had like iPhones like planted in corners getting reference sound, that we would then just like match up to the film and have something there. So it's funny even more listening to it. They actually, in this room, I set up 2 boom mics, and we just like threw it up on the television and like live ADR'd the entire scene, and then I would go in and like time it all out to match the reference audio and everything like that. So that's like a very like 70s scene, and that it's almost like the production audio didn't matter. We just ADR'd the whole thing back on top of it. Sound designed everything, did Foley passes, did design passes. It was like an all hands on deck approach for that scene, and watching it now, it's just so ridiculous. I love it so much because it's so ridiculous. There's like almost no other movie it could belong to, which is the best thing about it.
I'm still overwhelmed by the fact that this was 4 years. Like, I just can't imagine doing that one night and then living there for 3 months and being like, no one's going to clean up this, well,
no, because also you got to think about it too. Like the clothes would get stained with that stuff, and they would if they washed it, they would then have to just put it back on. So they would have to find the balance between like cleaning it up enough so that it doesn't become like an actual piece of cardboard, but also keeping it dirty enough that it was very easy to get into it. Which is funny because also along the sort of like PR trail for the movie, people have been asking me a lot about continuity. Like, you shot it for 4 years, like how did you keep continuity?
Yeah.
And it's just that Joe and Matt never cut their hair, and were like constantly trimming their beards to keep them the same length. And there's a scene earlier in the movie where Joe walks into a hallway, and he tells Stiggs, he's like, "There's the door, get out of here." And he like turns and goes into a hallway, and the camera whips to follow him. And in that whip, I think it's like 3.5 years on both of them. They're like suddenly 3.5 years younger, because it was something we shot in like 2021 or something. So continuity wise, I almost didn't even have to worry about anything, because everything is at 11. So once everything is at 11, you just come in every day and you set it to 11, and there you go.
It's a good time. It's a good time for horror, and it's a good time for funny horror. And this was all the most enjoyable horror season I think I'm going to have. And then I won't be scared at night, and I'll get to laugh. And I do love practical effects. Thank you guys so much for being able to do this conversation with us. It's been enlightening for me. So Josh Ethier, Brett Bachman, James Thomas, and Geofrey Hildrew, good luck in all future endeavors and success you have. That's going to be it for me, Chad Anderson, for Sight, Sound, and Story. This program where we talk to film editors about the editing process. So we'll see you in future episodes, and I guess have a good Halloween.